right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Something Super Podcast. I'm Steve.
And I'm Mark.
And guys, this week we are going to dive into a deep topic and sort of break it down and unwrap some of our personal thoughts on it. So, Mark, let's hear your great idea.
So, I actually graduated from college with a bachelor's degree in sociology. So, one thing that I'm really a big fan of is seeing how different topics and how different things affect society. So, it made me think of something that people always say, or it's usually a big mindset amongst society, is video games are a major cause of the violence we see in the world. Now, as of recent, we have had multiple villain origin stories in movies. You've seen Venom. They're getting ready to come out with Venom 2, where we're going to feature Carnage, who is, I don't know if you agree with me, Steve, but I feel like Carnage is arguably top 3 most vicious comic book characters ever.
Oh, yeah, he's a murderer.
Yeah, like literally he is a serial killer. So, but we had Joker, where it really opens up your mind to, okay, like maybe it's not just, oh, he's a bad dude. Like maybe there's some kind of mental aspect to the reason why they are the way they are. Maybe it's a confidence thing that adds to the way they are. Maybe they were bullied. Maybe there's underlying factors that could lead in. However, since a lot of people like to say, oh, like video games such as Mortal Kombat, Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, et cetera, cause a lot of the violence, I wanted to talk about whether like we think, these villain origin stories, mainly just if they do them on their own, like a Black Adam movie, not necessarily like, oh, we saw the fake Mandarin in Iron Man 3, like whether we think those could be taken and viewed in that same spotlight. So, Steve, I'm just curious on your initial. I know when I brought it up the other day, you're like, yeah, that's a really cool idea. What were some of like the first things that you kind of thought of?
So I think not necessarily that it's detrimental. Sure, people can sit here all day and blame video games and movies and TV, etc., for making kids quote unquote violent. But and this is not a shot at anyone that is a parent. It is. I believe it comes straight down to parenting. You and I both grew up in the '90s. We drank out of garden hoses and played in the street until it got dark. And we grew up just fine. Neither of us are serial killers. I feel like that had a lot to do with how our parents raised us and the different things. And again, there is a genetic side to it. Like you said, you went to school for sociology. So there is, certain things in the brain, I don't want to call them defects, but like abnormalities in the brain that cause people to feel certain ways or think certain things. And I don't want to attribute it all towards video games, TV, movies, because I played those games growing up.
Yeah.
And we are the perfect example of that. But conversely, I think, and this is one of the more recent movies, Joker, was a phenomenal look into the psyche of a quote unquote villain. He, this isn't the normal like comic book. He fell into a vat of crazy acid, turns out into a monster, whatever. This is a normal man trying to do his best, doing what's right in his own mind, working. He gets made fun of. He gets picked on. He's just trying to get through the day to day. And while they don't pinpoint one specific mental disorder in that movie, it's sort of, it's an amalgamation of like 5 or 6. It really does show you that the average person deals with this kind of stuff every day, whether you realize it or not. So that's what I liked about that. It was a very real take on, obviously, the made up character, the villain. So.
No, and I'm glad you actually brought up Joker, because the one thing, too, that I think gets overlooked is everybody goes, oh, he starts kind of like spiraling downward once he finds out his mom lied to him about being adopted and all that. But really, it happens before that, when his second session, when he's sitting, it's either the first or the second session when he's sitting with his therapist. And like, yeah, they cut the funding. Well, people are like, oh, well, he's just not seeing a therapist anymore. But it's not just that. Like, he's not even getting medication anymore. So now you take somebody that has, I believe it's a combination of schizophrenia along with
OCD.
OCD, and like three other things, like you said.
Like manic depression.
Right. So you take just that alone. Now it's not being treated. Now this guy finds out that he gets fired from his job. Now he finds out that the girl that he kind of has a crush on down the hall really doesn't want anything to do with him. So starts having delusions of him being in a successful relationship and stuff. Like his world starts crumbling around him. And it becomes more about society just bogging this guy down to the point to where now he's like, I have no other options, and he finally just lets go and stops caring about anything, and then that's when he kills Maury and his mother and all that. But really, it all pinpoints from that one part where, yeah, he's fine. He gets jumped at the beginning. He's kind of down, but like you can see, like just physically, he's just not in a good place. Like you can see, like his spine, he's super skinny, like but it comes down to it's like he's not trying to be this bad murderous dude. Like he was through most of the movie, he's trying to do the right thing and just get people to hear him out, but nobody's listening.
Yep. And I think that in and of itself was such a slap in society's face. It is so many people out there that are like, hey, I'll listen. We're here for you. And in reality, when you're in that mindset, you're alone. It does not matter if you are the most social person in the world. If everyone is there for you, you feel alone all the time. And it's tough. And I liked the fact that DC put that spin on it. It's, for me, an extremely real movie. When I watched it, I had expectations that it was going to have a comic book feel to it, whatever. It didn't. I'm not upset about that at all. The acting, phenomenal. Like 110%, he blew it out of the water. Amazing, just set up to the movie. And like you said, it really shows how society not necessarily failed him, but didn't do its due diligence. You said they cut the funding. Like without your medication, especially in that sort of state, you might as well have never had anything from the beginning.
Right. And the other thing too is, like you said, like it's a slap in the face to society because all the news focuses on is the three rich kids that he shoots.
Yep.
But then it turns around and it's like, here's this lower income, like whole section of Gotham. Like the one thing I love about DC is that since pretty much Batman's been a thing, Gotham's not a city. Gotham is a character. In everything you see. Like, I mean, when they did the Dark Knight trilogy, Christopher Nolan talked about it. When Tim Burton talked about it. Like, they focus more on how they want Gotham to look than they do Batman when they do these renditions of it.
Yeah.
And here you see Gotham, like, at its worst. I mean, you have this entire, because I'm sure he's not the only person when they cut the funding. I'm sure he's not the only person who gets affected. So that alone happens. You got the rich kids, honestly, would just straight bully him. I mean, at the beginning, they take his sign and jump him in the alley. Then he's on the train and he's laughing. And they're like, oh, like, you think it's funny? Like, he wasn't even talking to them.
Yep.
And they just were like, oh, we're just going to target you because you're dressed like a clown and you're alone. And then turns around and he kills them. But then everybody focuses on like, oh, these three kids. And it's like, well, these three kids were assholes.
Yeah. And
not that they deserved it, but
no, sure. But even to that point, he did nothing to them. They approached him. They, made the first moves. You could even argue self-defense in that matter. Yeah. But again, because they're three rich kids, three influential families in Gotham, that's who gets the attention. And, this isn't a real life movie, but I mean, how many different stories have you heard over, the course of your entire life that have not necessarily mirrored that, but have been similar enough that it could have been a real story.
Right. No, and that's like kind of like what I was saying. Cause any young kid could go watch that movie and then all of a sudden he'd say, oh, if I get jumped, I can just shoot people. Like, I mean, sure. you had the kid from Colorado or whatever, when the Dark Knight came out, that thought he was the Joker. Like you said, that wasn't a true story as far as the movie goes. But these are real life situations that actually happen in society and could create quote unquote super villains or could create a villain.
Yep.
And I mean, like you see it also in a movie like Venom. I mean, yeah, it's still got that campy comic book feel to it, but at least here now you're getting a character where he was sent here to kind of destroy the planet or whatever the case was, or he got excavated off his planet and brought here against his will, pretty much. But once he meets up with Eddie Brock, he starts off with like, all right, we're just gonna kill all these people. And Eddie's like, no, we're just gonna kill bad people. And then he kind of you see Venom start to learn and grow, and he starts to appreciate life. Because one big thing that I always felt about, I was watching Troy last night. Not that this was related, but something that Keely's Brad Pitt's character says in there is that the gods are jealous of us because we are mortal. Because gods are immortal, they can't appreciate everything they created. They take it for granted. So when you have a character like a symbiote that lives for hundreds of thousands of years, you have these characters like we're gonna get into Invincible.
Yep.
Like you have a character like Omni-Man, who, yeah, he turns out to be like just a straight cold-hearted villain. Spoiler if you haven't watched it all yet, but again, he's somebody that lives for hundreds of thousands of years. So for him, he gets jaded to appreciation of what's around him.
Yep.
So for me, that was kind of like what I saw in Venom was he starts to get that appreciation back. He's like, oh, like I like this place. I don't want to destroy it. And then that's when he teams up and they go after Riot and so on. But even still at the beginning, like there's no doubt Venom is a straight villain and he doesn't care if you're innocent, if you're a child, if you're a dog. Like if you can feed his purpose, which is keeping him alive because he's a parasite, he's going to use you. But when it comes to Eddie Brock, it's not so much I'm using you. It's like, I want to stay with you.
Yeah, they end up working together in a symbiotic relationship. So I'm glad you brought up Venom, because Venom is the absolute opposite of a Joker movie, where, again, like you said, in the beginning, he starts out, he wants to just bite people's heads off and kill people. And like, that's what the Venom symbiote does. You see him, he doesn't start with Eddie Brock. In this movie, he, crashes and then makes his way to Eddie. And it doesn't actually go after Eddie himself. It was Eddie that broke into the lab, and then by happenstance, he ended up with Venom. So looking at it from that, Eddie is attempting, you can look at it as the darkness inside of him. It's constantly trying to draw him to the murder, the just senseless killing of innocent people. But Eddie's the light in the situation. He is constantly fighting against Venom and like, oh, we don't need to kill people. Like, I'm just going to eat chicken. I don't need to eat someone's face or spleen or, organs. So I liked that sort of internal struggle that they placed out in there. And again, like you said, it wasn't super comic booky. Obviously the Venom aspect of it, you can't work your way around that, but it very much was, I think, the opposite of Joker, because you see that Eddie Brock was a good person to begin with. Eddie Brock he has his demons, he has his anger issues, he has his problems, just like every single person. You see him. I mean, for those of you that don't know, the reason that he's in San Francisco is because he had to leave New York because of what happened with Peter Parker. So that's why Venom has such a disdain for Spider-Man, because that was their beef from the jump before he got Venom in him.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I liked about Venom is it's like, this is a movie where, a kid could watch it and he's like, oh, that's a cool villain. But then he starts learning like, okay, like not everybody's bad. Because at the beginning, when they're trying to recover the symbiote and they like break into his apartment, at first Venom's just kind of like, all right, let's kill them all. Let's just take everybody out. But then like at the end, like Eddie's just in there doing his grocery shopping and the guy comes in and tries to rob him. And he's like, bad guy? Like he's like questioning it. He's like, is that one? Like, can we do this? And that's when Eddie's like, yeah, he's a bad guy. Like, so you just see Venom's growth, which, I mean, over the years in the comics, you have some issues where the Joker isn't as bad of a guy. I mean, look at the animated series. Like, when Batman dies, he literally kills the goon who, quote unquote, killed Batman and holds a funeral for Batman over top of it. So it's like, he's not just I mean, he is just doing it because he can, but like he has, even in his twisted way of thinking, he has a reason and a purpose for what he's doing.
Sure.
So,
And you could even look at why the Batman has survived so long. I mean, Bruce Wayne is a human being. He's not Superman. He's not the Green Lantern. He doesn't have superpowers. So if the Joker really wanted to kill him, it could have happened before. And the Joker enjoys the cat and mouse. He likes the attention. And he gets that special brand of attention from Batman.
I mean, he even gets jealous, and like there's multiple issues where like Batman's just in Arkham and he's like going to talk to somebody else, and from his cell, Joker's yelling like, "Oh, I thought that we had an agreement that like we wouldn't work with other people." Like to him, like it's a game.
Exactly. And that's, again, that just is a testament to his psyche. It's, I don't know. I think it's deeper, and that's what I liked about the movie, was it really dove into his crazy.
Yeah.
But, again, jumping back to, TV, I mean, you've seen, hell, I know he's not technically a villain, but he's definitely not comic booky. Oliver Queen in the beginning of Archer. Or, sorry, not Archer, Arrow. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, no, at the beginning of Arrow, he's more of an anti-villain than he is an anti-hero.
Oh, absolutely. And this man is just, I mean, obviously he's doing the greater good, but he's definitely not going about it the right way.
Right.
Like these are people who are, stealing money and killing kids and doing bad things. Like I get it, but he eventually figures it out. But again, just like Venom, starts out real dark. He's just shooting people in the chest, leaving bodies. What are you going to do about it? Then he starts to gain somewhat of a conscience. He starts to, like, he's all about himself in the beginning. Then he has Diggle. Then eventually by like season 6, he builds a team. Like it just shows you the world isn't necessarily as bad as you make it out to be all the time, but there are demons inside of people. And this comes from a kid who was one of the richest people in the world, had everything he could ever ask for, and still decided to come back. And he still had his money. It wasn't like he was going to come back to nothing, but he chose to take his money and do the greater good.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, the first, I would say 4 seasons of Arrow for me were probably like golden. Like they was written so well. I mean, Stephen Amell and the whole cast did a great job portraying those characters. Granted, it's more like a Batman Jr. than it is a Green Arrow in a lot of cases. I mean, I know that's the one argument a lot of people have is all the Green Arrow villains in that show are actually really Batman foes for the most part. I mean, you got Ra's al Ghul. He fights Deathstroke. He fights.
I liked Deathstroke in that series too.
Dude, Manu Bennett kills it as Deathstroke in that series.
He's
like, but no. So I mean, to go back to the original, like our original topic, like these are all things that I mean, everybody has their own decisions. Everybody makes their own choices. So anybody could go watch the movie Joker and then be like, okay, that's acceptable for me to do. Or anybody can. I mean, that's what movies are. Movies are art. Art is open to interpretation.
Correct.
But I 100% agree with you, though. It goes back to how are these kids being brought up? Like, what is the home life like? Is this a kid that's, I mean, we're going to start getting in, I might start bringing up some serious topics, but like, is there, abuse in the home, or is it a very loving family? I mean, yep. You got characters like Scarecrow, where his dad was like experimenting on him with the fear gas, and that's why he's so obsessed with fear. I mean, you have characters like Harvey Dent, who becomes Two-Face. He didn't have a terrible home life growing up that I know of. Like he became one of the greatest like lawyers in the DCU. Then he becomes district attorney, and then literally he just has split personality disorder, which comes back down to they're just getting people on the right medications and stuff. But like, it doesn't matter what kind of background you come from. It comes from like what influences you have. I watched plenty of stuff. I mean, I watched Dragon Ball Z growing up, where I mean, Goku was just murking people left and right because he's like, hey, I'm strong, you're strong, let's do it. And then he's like, oh, I picked a fight with you and you're not going to stop until I kill you. But like, I didn't go out, don't get me wrong. Tried going Super Saiyan multiple times. I tried flying, but I never just straight up went out. I was just like, hey, I'm a super strong kid. Let's fight each other.
Oh, speaking of super strong children going out and killing people. So we all know Superman's origin story. Crash lands on Earth, grows up, good family, etc., on a farm, becomes the hero of, Metropolis, aka New York City. Brightburn is the literal opposite of that. Same exact story, but the kid gets picked on in school. Crash lands, he's an alien. He has all the same powers as Superman. He can fly, he's super fast, he's invincible, laser vision. And I remember like watching the trailer to that movie. If you have not seen that movie, Brightburn is phenomenal. Kid gets picked on. They like doing like trust falls or whatever, and all the kids let him fall on the ground because they're like, oh, you're a weirdo. And they make the kid help him up, and he just shatters their arm. Just grips their hand so hard it breaks all the bones in their arm.
Yeah, no,
that's insane. Like, and again, that goes to show you that two people with the exact same origin story could end up in two completely different worlds. You got Superman, who is the best of us. He's the greater good all the time, obviously, except for certain stories, which we can get into later. But Brightburn, same exact story, but he took it
completely
too personal.
Different outcome.
Yeah, completely different outcome. Like, and I loved it. And I personally think that it should show that even if, I know the good guys always win. Like, we get that. That's cool. Like, I love the comic book mentality. I love it. You see it in like almost every single movie. And I'm not saying the bad guys should win, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it should show you that even if you have problems and even if you have your darker demons, that you can still come out on top. Because that's a real world thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's why I love this topic, because literally you can get in this so much here. And I mean, if you guys, listening, we're on Apple Podcasts and stuff. You can leave comments, go on Twitter, go on Facebook. Let us know what you guys think. Like what are some comic book stories that you feel kind of either get not misinterpreted, but like you feel like you could read deeper into, and maybe it's not just, oh, this guy's just a bad dude. Like, don't get me wrong, there are villains out there that are just bad people.
Yep.
But I mean, even like Lex Luthor, his whole thing is like, hey, at any moment, like him and Batman are two sides of the same coin. They both have the viewpoint of, hey, like Superman is literally a god amongst men. At any time, he could just say, fuck all y'all, I'm going home, torch the planet, and just dip out. But the difference is Lex Luthor is dedicating his life to finding ways to kill him and stop him, to where Batman's like, look, I have a contingency plan if shit goes sideways, but I'm going to give him benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely. And
go.
Like you said, there's two sides to every coin. There's two outcomes to every story. And I like the fact that people are, and it's personal, I get it. I love Iron Man. He's one of my favorite characters. But what if Tony, and this is actually a what if comic that I own. What if Tony Stark sold out? What if he used it for like war instead of to help people?
Yeah, I mean, he could have easily just come back and be like, oh, we're selling rockets and shit still? Okay, cool. Cha-ching.
Yeah,
like he didn't have to shut down the whole division. I'm going to make mecha suits and sell them to the highest bidder. And sold Iron Man suits across the world like Hammer was trying to do. So it's there, and Justin Hammer is a very similar, as far as origin story, but like he's a rich kid. He has a defense company. Yeah.
He wants to build suits and sell them to the world, which is Tony's like, no, like I'm not giving this shit out to anybody. This is for me and Colonel Rhodes, and we're going to do our thing and we're going to kick ass.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, now that I think about it, I mean, just look at it, just wrapped up and finished up as Falcon and the Winter Soldier with Carly and the Flag Smashers. Like, at least at the beginning, don't get me wrong, she goes off the roads. There's really no redemption story for her. I think that's more in some of the production things that they had go on with some of the other storylines they had to cut that made her that much worse. I really don't think she was intended to be like, by the end, just okay, we're just going to kill everybody.
I wanted her to have a redemption.
I wanted her to have a redemption too, but I feel like they had to use what they were given at that point because they cut out the whole pandemic or
Yeah.
worldwide sickness thing, that storyline they had going. But even at the beginning, though, like you can see, okay, she has this power. She decides to go against the power broker, who we now know was hiring them from the beginning, and they were her protection.
Yep.
So she's like, you know what? I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what I want to do, and I want to do the right thing. So, I mean, it comes down to Bucky. Bucky has the super soldier serum. We saw what happened when, John Walker got into his feels. Like he just went out and straight murked the dude. Like Bucky, the only time Bucky I believe has killed was when he was brainwashed, if I'm not mistaken. I won't say that because obviously he killed a bunch of the aliens in like Infinity War.
Sure, but like
But as far as right,
murder.
like cold out murder, I don't think he actually murdered anybody outside of being brainwashed.
I want to agree with you. I don't think,
At least in the movies. I know in the comics it might be different.
That's a different story.
But I know in the movies, I mean, he killed the guy's son while he was brainwashed. He killed the Starks while he was brainwashed.
Yep.
He tried to kill Fury while he was brainwashed.
Yeah, he went
fought
on
through to not kill Cap while he was brainwashed. Yeah. So as far as I know,
even him. So that's another perfect example of getting the right help can put you back on the right track. So he went to therapy in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, had that sit down, had that tough conversation. I mean, obviously, bullshits it a little bit in the beginning. I'm not having nightmares anymore, which is we watch him wake up from a nightmare in almost every scene. And then you see him have that like heart to heart with Sam at the end. And a lot of people forget that Sam was a counselor in the military. Yeah. Like he helped people that came back and had PTSD and had these nightmares and had all these problems. And that was the thing that really made Bucky feel better, which I loved because that showed that they're going to be working together more in the future. And like, I love their team up. It's awesome.
Even after the military, he was one. Cause I mean, I don't know if a lot of people pick up on this, but in Endgame, Steve Rogers is running groups, and that's because Sam was the one who got snapped away. And when he first met Sam, like he was on the run or whatever, and he's like, "Oh, I'm Sam Wilson. Oh, I'm Steve Rogers." But then Steve actually goes and sees him helping the other soldiers. Like he's still adapting to the world, and he starts to go to those meetings. So when Sam gets snapped away in Infinity War, Steve steps up and actually takes over those meetings. So like, the fact that now Bucky is going and getting the help, like it just shows that kind of progression. I mean, honestly, just quick PSA, if anyone is out there and you guys need help, like go get it. Like mental health, especially nowadays, is not something to joke about. Like if you're not in a good place, find anybody, go to a therapist, talk to a friend, like get it out there. Don't just sit on it. Don't just let it fester inside of you and feel like you can deal with it, because you don't have to. That's where people are here for.
Absolutely. And as somebody who's dealt with those things, via my personal life and the military, et cetera, like I can say that doing those things, having those tough conversations, it definitely has helped. So yes, to sort of ring back to what Mark said, do what you got to do, find that help, find that person that you feel comfortable talking with. And, maybe sometimes having that tough conversation, or if you know somebody that's dealing with some tough stuff, let them know you're there for them. But I think as far as villains go, to sort of circle back to the beginning, I would love to see more villain origin stories, because personally, I don't believe that they directly affect societal behavior. But as a comic book fan and, a fellow nerd, it is super important to sort of dive into those stories, because we got all of our heroes, we know how everyone was made. We get it.
Yep.
But for those of us that are just getting into this, or maybe you've only seen the MCU movies and some of the DC movies, like it's super cool to see how a lot of these people came to be. Like we got Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings coming out. Like that's awesome, because that shows that the birth of the 10 Rings, which was an Easter egg throughout the MCU from day one. So again, personally, I'm excited to see all of these villain origin stories and anything that's coming to light. And I'm all about it.
Yeah, no, and I mean the other good thing too that I like about them is, like we said earlier, it kind of gives you a look into why they are the way they are in a lot of cases. So it comes down to kind of like that moral question, like, is stealing a loaf of bread to feed your starving family really a crime? Because, like, yeah, stealing is the crime, but it's not like you're just stealing for the hell of it. You're doing it to take care of yourself and others. So it kind of becomes, these movies kind of show you that morality side, which the movie Shazam, literally, I can't think of the villain's name, but it, like, literally, that is the moral question. Shazam Larry brings the guy there as a kid. He says, look, if you take this little orb, you could have all the power in the world, and it's controlled by the seven deadly sins. And then he reaches right for it, gets booted out. Then he gets in, Billy Batson. Billy's like, ha, is that like a made up? Like, is this fake? And he ends up becoming Shazam. Like, there's so many different ways that villains can be written and written really, really well. And for me, like, I really don't think that, don't get me wrong, movies and video games can play into some of the negative things we see in society. But at the end, I just think it comes down more to the person themselves, what kind of upbringing they had, what kind of character they have, what kind of support system do they have in the home and at school and in life. But yeah,
Actually,
I mean,
I'm super glad you brought up Shazam because real quick, like they're both, well, the one kid's dad's just like a piece of shit, the one that becomes the villain. And then Shazam, like his mother just abandoned him. And they could have both ended up the exact same way.
Oh, 100%. And it comes back to the thing you were saying about Superman and then Brightburn. Like, it's the same story almost, but two completely different outcomes.
Yep. So, yeah, that's really all I've got for this week. But, like Mark said, shoot us a message on Twitter. We are SS Podcast 52.
Yep, at SS Podcast 52. We are on Instagram, Something Super Podcast. You can find us on Facebook at Something Super Podcast. Join the group and start a conversation. We really want to hear from you guys, and we want to hear your guys' take on what you think. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please leave a review, leave some comments for us. We love reading them and hearing what we got going on. We are also on Apple Podcasts. We're on Google Podcasts. We are on Spotify. And as always, we want to thank Anchor for hosting us. Outside of that, we really do appreciate you guys tuning in and just want to thank you for listening. But I'm Mark.
And I'm Steve. And we'll catch you guys next week.
Later.